Have you ever heard the saying that life isn't fair? That somehow everything is some big scheme that works against you? We have all heard the saying that bad things happen to good people, and every day seems to prove that statement. Our social structure is crumbling. Empathy is at an all-time low. What do we see on a daily basis? We see that the good die young. We see that the greedy grow even richer. And someone with a true pure heart somehow seems to get left behind. Again, I say that people say that life isn't fair. But I like to say that life is what you make it. But then I run across cases like this, and I quickly realize sometimes life isn't fair. You can be dealt a hand in which you'll never win.
November 2nd, 1998. The world would make way for Ashlynn Sparks. The place she called home would be McCalla, Alabama, where she would be born to her father, Harrelson, and her mother, April. Sadly, for Ashlynn's parents, it wouldn't work out, and they would eventually go their separate ways. Life for a young Ashlynn was great. She had a great family support system. Amongst herself, she would have 3 brothers and a sister. With her parents going their separate ways, this would introduce 4 step-siblings. Having a large family taught her a lot about life, but also even more about love. At an early age, Ashlynn would discover her love for competing in pageants. But aside from competing in pageants, she enjoyed hanging out with family and friends, but also dancing. As the hands on the clock continued to move forward, she would say farewell to elementary. The days of finger painting and simple math would quickly evolve into some of the best years of our life. The years when toys are swapped with crushes and the desires of your childhood begin to fade. The infamous years of high school. While in high school, Ashlynn was known as vivacious, the charismatic teen with their southern drawl would spread words of both love and hope towards others. While in high school, she still enjoyed beauty pageants, and she was also a cheerleader. If you went to McAddery High School during the years when Ashlynn was present, you knew her name. She was the popular teen with a bright smile, but although she was kind, she wasn't one to take her kindness for weakness. She was very outspoken. But for Ashlynn, her loving heart was just as big as her pride. She's described as someone who was compassionate towards others. While she wasn't working on her next beauty pageant routine, she would spend her free time feeding the homeless, but also helping the animals. By 2016, Ashlynn Sparks would be 18 years old. She's referred to as both tiny and fierce. Her mother describes her at that time as hard-headed and strong-willed, but someone who was on their way to becoming a great woman. At that time, things were going great for Ashlynn. She was studying cosmetology, and she also had a boyfriend whom she had grown fond of, someone she loved and was planning a future with. But little did anyone know that roughly 1 month after her 18th birthday, a tragedy would strike that would claim her life. Everyone who knew and loved her, their lives would change. It would seem as if everything went up in flames. And when the smoke cleared, her lack of presence would be a constant reminder to hug those around you and to keep the ones you hold close, even closer. December 7th, 2016. Bessemer, Alabama Police Department would be dispatched to a convenience store. The store was located in the area of Dartmouth Avenue and Highway 150. When officers arrived on the scene, they would find 18-year-old Ashlynn Sparks suffering from gunshot wounds, alongside of her boyfriend. Both Ashlynn and her boyfriend would be immediately rushed to the hospital. Ashlynn's boyfriend would arrive with non-life-threatening injuries. However, Ashlynn would arrive in critical condition despite the doctor's attempt to save her life. They would fail. She would ultimately be pronounced deceased. The authorities are now faced with the hard task of contacting the family and letting them know that their loved one will no longer be here. As far as the investigation, all they know is that they had 2 victims, one who's now deceased, but another who survived. So, like clockwork, they would go interview Ashlynn's boyfriend. But when talking to him, they didn't get much. When questioned on whether or not he knew who harmed him and his girlfriend, he didn't know. The only information he offered at that time was that him and his girlfriend were going to meet some people, but when they got there, they were robbed. Or at least, that's what they were attempting to do, because once the boyfriend saw the threat, he would throw the car in reverse and attempt to escape. But that's when the 2 assailants would open fire. At that point in time, the boyfriend knew that he had been struck. But at this point, he was running off adrenaline. He would manage to drive off. This incident occurred in Lipscomb, Alabama, which is roughly 8 minutes away from Bessemer, where the authorities were dispatched to the convenience store. Aside from telling the authorities that he fled for his life, he couldn't help them. The authorities are now working an active homicide investigation with 0 suspects. The date is now December 8th, 2016. With no one in custody, they would do the normal rundown. They would submit the applications to review the phone records of Ashlynn Sparks. They would also interview family and friends. But when the day came to a close, they were no closer to apprehending the culprit. The days would slowly begin to pass by, and with each passing day, it became that much more excruciating for the family because they were in the dark with 0 answers. But finally, after a long investigation, the family would have the answers that they were seeking. On December 17th of 2016, then 21-year-old Anthony Dwayne Smith would be arrested on charges of murder.
Fairfield man is in jail this evening for the murder of a McCalla teenager, Ashlynn Sparks. 20-year-old Anthony Smith from Fairfield is facing a capital murder charge. He is in the Jefferson County Jail tonight with no bond. Deputies expect to make additional arrests very soon. Sparks was shot Wednesday night in Lipscomb on Circle Avenue. Police say she was with her boyfriend when men tried to rob them and shot into the car. Sparks' boyfriend survived, but she died at the hospital.
At this point in time, the authorities aren't saying what exactly led them to this suspect, but from the looks of it, the suspect was beginning to tell all, because 2 days later, on December 19th of 2016, authorities would announce that they had warrants for 3 other participants. They would announce that they are now looking for then 20-year-old Richard Martinez, 22-year-old Courtney Devon, and 23-year-old Adam Smith. One by one, the culprits would be captured and taken to the local jail, awaiting their trial. But this trial wouldn't be quick. They caught them at the end of 2016. They were set for arraignment in 2017. But even by 2018, the case still hadn't been resolved. Like before, time would continue to trickle down. 2019. And then in 2020, one of the suspects would finally go to court. But in a shocking twist, Adam Smith would show up to court and plead guilty on the charges of murder. In this situation, we have 1 down, 3 cases to go. But with Adam pleading guilty to the charges, more of the story didn't come out. There were still a lot of unanswered questions. By the time Adam showed up and pleaded guilty, it was no surprise to the courts, because as time passed, the people involved began to break away from each other. They began telling more of the story, and the evidence was piled high. To the prosecution's surprise, one of the suspects would turn state witness in order to receive a plea deal. The prosecution's star witness would be none other than Courtney Devon, who at this point has now been identified as the girlfriend of Adam Smith. Due to this being an ongoing investigation, she didn't tell much, but she did shine a light on what transpired on the evening that Ashlynn Sparks lost her life. December 7th, 2016, around 10:30 p.m. On this night, Ashlynn Sparks would drive to Liscum, Alabama, along with her boyfriend. The reason for this trip on that cold December night was they were going to pick up Xanax pills. At this time, it isn't clear whether or not they were going for personal use or for resale purposes. But if I have to interject my opinion, I would have to say no one is about to rob you if you're only there to purchase a few. Meanwhile, while Ashlynn Sparks and her boyfriend are making this drive, Courtney Devon would be at home with her mother and grandmother hanging up Christmas lights. While spending time with her family, Courtney Devon would receive a call from her boyfriend, Adam Smith, who at this point in time didn't own a vehicle. So Courtney Devon goes to pick up her boyfriend, but when she gets there, like a lot of guys without a car, Adam Smith jumps in the driver's seat. He then goes and picks up the other assailants. Now, the culprits lived in Fairfield, Alabama, which is roughly a 12-minute drive from Liscum. So they're on their way to Liscum to meet Ashlynn Sparks and her boyfriend, who again were going to purchase a few items. But the plan wasn't to sell them anything. The plan all along was to take what they were coming to spend. They then meet up in an undisclosed area in Liscum. Once both parties have reached the meetup spot, Adam Smith would exit the vehicle. Now, it isn't clear who the second assailant was who went with him. It's not clear if it was Stephen Martinez or Anthony Smith, but one of them exited the vehicle and went along with Adam to commit this act. The two assailants walk over to the vehicle of Ashlynn Sparks and her boyfriend. They instantly draw a weapon and demand money. In the course of this, Ashlynn's boyfriend would throw the car in reverse and attempt to escape, but the assailants begin firing, striking her boyfriend in the upper arm area. During the commotion, Ashlynn Sparks puts her hands up over her face in a defensive position. She is then struck in her hands, but also in the head region. At this time, her boyfriend manages to escape, but while they're on the run, Adam Smith would jump back into his girlfriend's vehicle and begin to chase them up the street. This chase would go on for minutes, before finally they would end up 12 minutes away in Bessemer, pulled over at a convenience store. By the time Ashlynn Sparks and her boyfriend reached this convenience store in Bessemer, they were no longer being chased, and her boyfriend was able to contact the authorities as well as emergency personnel. They then wait inside of the vehicle until the cops show up along with the paramedics. They are then both rushed to the hospital. Ashlynn and her boyfriend would arrive at the hospital shortly after 11 p.m. on December 7th of 2016. And Ashlynn would continue to fight for her life overnight. But by 11:27 a.m. of December 8th of 2016, she would lose this battle, and she would ultimately be pronounced deceased. This now leads us back to where we were before, where Adam Smith pled guilty in a court of law. For his role in this, he would receive a sentence of 20 years to life in prison. As far as his girlfriend, Courtney Devon, she would take a plea deal where she would also be sentenced to 20 years. But the catch to this was she would only have to serve 5 before being released on parole. And another stipulation is that she has to testify in the other court cases. As for Stephen Martinez and Anthony Smith, well, their case hadn't been updated. It isn't clear whether or not they've gone to court or whether they're still stretching this battle out. But one thing is for certain, when the time comes, they will receive life because the evidence is undoubtedly overwhelming. In the beginning of this video, I made mention that people say life isn't fair. When you think about this case in its totality, you'll quickly begin to realize that this was all for nothing. In a fraction of a second, so many lives were changed for good. This is a story all about choices. The choices you make and the repercussions. As 18-year-old Ashlynn Sparks rode alongside of her boyfriend on that cold December night, I'm pretty sure the last thing on their mind was that that encounter would be their last ride together. I'm sure that when Courtney took her keys on that night and went to go pick up her boyfriend Adam, she never knew that before that night ended, they would all be on the hook for murder. As for Courtney Devon's mother, well, she says that her daughter was no more than a mere victim of her relationship. She says that her daughter is no hardened criminal, and the only reason why she pled guilty to the offense is because her attorneys told her that that could go either way. You can either turn state witness, or you can go down with the rest of them. How do you guys feel about being charged with a crime if you didn't hold the weapon? If someone else decides to do the unthinkable, and you're right alongside of them, well, in the eyes of the law, you're just as culpable. But you really have to sit and analyze the entire situation, because before you got to that point, you made a choice. A choice to date a guy who was in the streets. A choice to allow this guy to corrupt your mind. And ultimately, your love would eventually be your downfall. But I know, life isn't fair, right? Well, things weren't fair for Ashlynn either. They received the harshest sentence that anyone can receive. A sentence worse than life in prison. A life with no Ashlynn. A life where there's always an empty spot at the table. But what about years down the road when you realize no amount of time would ever heal the pain? My heart truly goes out to the family. Before Ashlynn would officially leave this world, she would commit one more act of love. When she passed away, she was an organ donor, and the gentle heart that stopped working for her would come alive in another. A girl who went by the name of Kylie Davila. And for a period of time, her heart would live on. Sadly, Kylie would ultimately lose her battle. And on May 24th of 2021, she would pass away. The gentle heart of Ashlynn Sparks would once again cease to beat. Rest in peace, Ashlynn Sparks. Thank you for being a light for others.